Hello, Radio Free Skaro listeners. Stephen here with some archive content in the lead-up to our three-part Miniscope on the works of director Rachel Talalay. Rachel has been a friend to us here at RFS, appearing no fewer than 6 times, and we thought it was worth re-releasing our interviews and commentaries with her over the years as a lead-in to our conversations about her work on Doctor Who. This installment features our first 2 interviews with Rachel. The first is Warren's interview with her, which we originally released on Radio Free Skaro number 445 in the run-up to the Series 8 finale. Here is that now.
And I'm here with Rachel Talalay, who's directed the last 2 and as of yet unseen episodes of Peter Capaldi's first season as Doctor Who. Rachel, how's it going?
Okay, thanks. No, I'm just so excited that it's, we're a week away now. Mm-hmm. And the teaser trailer came out today and seems to be getting quite a response. So, but lucky me.
Literally just minutes ago as to when we're recording this. And like you said, you're getting a big response on Twitter and elsewhere. What can you tell us about the episode that's coming up besides what we saw in that trailer, if anything?
I can't tell you anything.
Okay.
So I guess the news is that, yes, who Missy is revealed.
Okay.
And I'm amazed that we were able to keep the secret. Mm-hmm. Absolutely amazed. And you'll find out who Missy is and you'll find out who Seb is.
Okay, cool. Interesting. And I know the traditional way to do that is to shoot everything in a studio so that you don't have to, but obviously you couldn't do that with this one because there's Cybermen running around. What was that like, being able to direct Cybermen running around London, which, they've been known to do from time to time?
It was unbelievable to be outside St. Paul's Cathedral and to have Cybermen there. And it was probably one of the most magical days in my directing career. And I've had some really fortunate, amazing, magical days. But there are only a few shows that would get permission to open the royal doors of St. Paul's Cathedral and allow the Doctor and Missy to come and Cybermen to come through the royal doors, which are basically saved for royal events, for weddings and funerals. And so royalty really are only who's allowed to step through those doors. But obviously the Doctor is royalty in his own right.
Did you come to the show as a fan? Was it like a lifelong dream to do this? Or is it more, I'm not going to belittle it, but was it a show you took on because it would be a challenge, or is it both?
No, I came absolutely as a fan, more so as a fan of the reboot than the original show, although now people are mad at me for just even saying that. And I absolutely watched the show when I was a kid. I'm old enough to say that, and Tom Baker was my doctor.
Same here.
But I can't say that that show would have made me say, I must direct this. But And I was so skeptical when I read about the reboot, thinking, how are they going to do this, And the second I turned it on, I was blown away. And I thought, I have to work on this. It was an absolute passion. So I have a British agent. I have British citizenship. And I went and said, you have to get me an interview. I have to show them that they have to let me do this show. And I interviewed a couple of times. But living in Vancouver made me geographically challenging. And so I really felt like unless I went and sort of stood on the doorstep and moved to Cardiff, that it wasn't going to happen. So I fell over when I had the email that said they're looking for a director for the for Stephen Moffat's 2-part finale. And are you interested? And, are you interested as you sort of breathe deeply, hyperventilate? And the first... the answer was obviously duh on I had, as I said, I'd interviewed several times, so the interest didn't wane, with Peter Capaldi being the Doctor. And then the next email from my agent was, of course, it's a long shot. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then 5 days later, I got the job.
And looking over your IMDb, you've got a ton of experience. So I'm kind of curious, what's, if any, are there differences working in, you've worked on a bunch of Canadian TV, you've worked on a bunch of American TV, and is this your first foray into British TV? And if so, what are the differences between the three different sort of environments?
It's not my first foray into British television at all. I know Mark Gatiss because I did Wind in the Willows.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right, yes.
As well as I've done 3 different British series over the past 10 years. And there is no similarity between directing British television and there's similarity only in what you do as a director. But is it similar? But the entire way that everything is done in North America versus the UK, it's just so different. We could do an entire program on that.
Well, I am kind of curious. What are some of the big specifics, I guess? So,
American television is a factory, and directors are just small pegs in this factory, and directors come and go. So, an entire episode is done. You do, on a larger show, 8 days prep, 8 days shoot, 3 days post production. And you're on to your next show. And you get a pretty hefty paycheck. On British television, I was on Doctor Who. I did, on the 2 episodes, I did 6 weeks prep, 5 weeks shoot, and 2 months of post-production, including still, on American television, you don't do any of your editing beyond your very, very first cut. On British television, the director is a director through the end. I've been approving all the visual effects. I mean, with Stephen and Brian, of course, and they're still the top dogs. But I mean, it's a very, very collaborative, respectful environment for a director. And so the visual effects and the sound and the grade and all the post-production things that you do if you're making a feature film, you do in the UK. Whereas in America, literally 3 days of edit and out the door, and the producers take it over. And you may not hear from anybody until it goes on the air, and you won't see and that's when you see the final results, and you'll either be like, oh, wow, they used, 98% of what I cut, or I edited, or, oh boy, that's not anything like the show that was either written or that I directed. So it takes a very specific there's a very specific speed and factoryness to regular American television. And I'm not talking about the golden age of television and cable, the new world of cable, which is definitely an improvement, but it's not like making feature films. It's still, maybe you might get 10 or 12 days to shoot a bigger show, but that's not very long compared to making a film. And so, but the grass is always greener on the other side. When I was sitting in the editing room, they were saying, most British directors want to go to America so desperately. And I said, until they get there and realize that they get 3 days of post-production and then they're kicked out. So you're really an expediter. You're there to supply the best film raw material for the producers. And then you move on.
And with Canadian TV, is it, other than the way lower budgets, as we all know, but is it more like the American or the British model, or is it its own animal?
No, it's completely the American model.
Oh, okay.
Just less money, but not necessarily less money than, lower budget American cable. Mm-hmm. So, every show is different. Amazing thing about Doctor Who is that the budget is so low, and nobody knows what the exact budget is. But I look at it and I go, oh my God, this rivals this, we were making things the size of, I'm gesticulating here, but we were making I read the script and I'm thinking, oh my God, we're doing, Iron Man in the script for a budget for a television budget that's not expanded into the cable world.
And that's kind of what they were doing on the old show. They just didn't have the tech to make it look nice, and now they do, right?
And so now people are just so passionate about it that people give everything to the show. And because it's Doctor Who. And that part, I mean, backing up to this question of, did I just do this because it was going to be a challenge or no? I mean, I think it's really important. And I think it's important for the fandom that there's an understanding that while I don't pretend that I know every Doctor Who detail, I have an incredible respect for the show and love of the show. So even when I say, well, I wasn't, I didn't grow up on it in the way I grew up on Star Trek a little bit more strongly, and Time Tunnel. But because I was in England only a little bit of my childhood, and I was in the U.S. more. But the respect for the show is so, so, so important. And I knew that I was scared. I mean, they hadn't, only the 7th woman hired in 51 years, possibly the only American brain. And you just, I mean, there's a lot to live up to on a show like this, and having Moffat's finality and these scripts are incredible from my standpoint.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the being the 7th woman, you said, director, and there's a big push online, at least, people saying why are there no women writers, and very few. I think you're the first in the new series woman director. Do you bring a different perspective because of that, or is it you just walk in and do your job? Like, how does that reflect, and what's your feeling on this show and actually British TV generally? Is it a problem just with Doctor Who, or is it more a general problem?
I think it's a bigger problem in America. I'm not the first woman director with Stephen Moffat. I'm just the first one in a couple of years. Right. Okay. And while I say I'm the 7th, Sheree Folkson directed the episode that's on tonight. So of the 12 episodes, 3 of them were directed by women, even though I did 2 and Sheree did 1. But I like to say, but I was hired before Sheree because we actually shot my episodes before hers. So that's my little whatever ego thing that I was so I'm number 7 and she's number 8. Sorry, Sheree. But no, I don't think that I bring a different perspective. I don't think that there's such a huge difference. But other people do. I mean, I just am who I am, and I have a lot of visual effects experience. And I was really incredibly fortunate to get those from the Nightmare on Elm Street days and to be interested in it. And it was incredibly useful to have that. But Sheree doesn't have the kind of experience I had, and she was hired. And, there are very good technical people there to help you. I just found that it helped me speak the language. How would I know, what's different about me being a woman, except I'm quieter? But there are quiet men, there are quiet men too. But you don't think, oh, I've come from a female perspective, I'm bringing something different to this. You just think I'm trying to interpret this incredible script in the most dramatic way that will just bring out the genius of all this writing and this incredible cast.
And actually, in terms of perspective, I'm interested in, because you have a big, extensive horror background. I watched that Nightmare on Elm Street documentary that's 4 hours long, and you're quite a big figure in it. Because you have I think you worked on all of them, didn't you, in one capacity or another, including directing one of them?
The first 6, yes.
Yeah. And so you have all this horror background in addition to VFX background. Does any of that figure into how you approach what you do on Doctor Who?
Every single thing I learned on Nightmare on Elm Street, I used on Doctor Who. And if and when we talk again after episode 12, I can give a couple of examples of things that there were, but every trick in the book that I learned in terms of low budget filmmaking and visual effects, even though they're not the same world, everything I learned came to bear on, particularly in the Nightmare films, because we did so much for so little, and so I had to keep just learning new tricks. And even though it's different and it's changed, it's the same type of filmmaking. So every day I thanked, my lucky stars that I had been involved in the Nightmare films and been able to be so creative and that's what I love about doing visual effects. I was I'm on a new show called South of Hell, which is a horror show for WeTV. And the director of photography was saying that he just worked on a wonderful show, but it was very conventional. And he was so excited to be doing horror because it's so massively creative. Mm-hmm. And there are the rules. You're creating new rules. So that's what I love about it.
And I noticed that you, like a lot of other directors, have shifted from film to TV. And it just seems like there's just a lot more opportunity for you guys in TV. And to be honest, a lot less opportunity for everybody because there's nothing but giant superhero films and nothing else. And you can only get so many people to direct those, right? So I mean, have you found that there's a more sort of verdant field in TV for directing now? I mean, I moved over for reasons to do with having children way back when, and would love to have moved back before it sort of disappeared. But at this point, the opportunities absolutely, and if you can't get on the next Marvel film, which of course I dream to do, then there's almost nothing in between. You're on no budget or massive budget, and what I worry about is there's no training space. So there's this feeling like television is easy. Television is hard. Mm-hmm. It's so hard. It's so hard to do that much work in that little time. And it was easier to do features where you had just that more time and more people supporting you. And and none of it's easy, at least not for me. But as a newcomer, how do you break into television when it really is beneficial to have the kind of experience to be able to turn around and say, oh, well, here's what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And I worry about it. I worry about it, as a training ground for women and minorities who are having a hard enough time to start with. But women often say to me, how come you've got to do all this action and how, you're on that tiny list of women who do that. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's because I lucked into the Nightmare on Elm Street film and then got more and more experience. But that stuff isn't easy to break into. So I worry that this new model of either massive films or, you have to mortgage your apartment that you don't own. Mm-hmm. You have to max out your credit cards to make a web series to get noticed. It's very hard to get training. Mm-hmm. Well, and speaking of training, that's initially how I found out about you, besides the Doctor Who thing, is that you are actually teaching here in Vancouver as well. Maybe you could speak to what that's all about. Like, how did you fall into that? I answered an ad. I teach at UBC in the film program, and I actually sort of noticed this ad that they were looking for a new prof, and I thought I should see what this is like, and it's incredibly, incredibly rewarding. It's an amazing program at UBC. It's very small, but it's very specialized. The students are remarkable. And I found it incredibly beneficial. Until I started teaching, never before had I had to articulate all the incredibly complex elements of filmmaking. And it's really interesting to have to talk about what it is rather than and articulate what it is in a teaching framework, and to help and support these students who have who are all so excited and have all these opportunities, and yet none of them. Great. I think is there anything else you'd like to tell our audience before I let you go back to working on your show? No, I don't. Watch the episodes. I mean, I'm so, for me, I just can't believe how fortunate I was to land this job, and what an incredible experience it's been. And I really hope that the audience responds to them, because I just feel so lucky.
And now our second chat with Rachel from Radio Free Skaro number 463, recorded in a very busy lobby at the LAX Marriott at Gallifrey One in February 2015. Hey, Warren, Chris, and I are standing here in the lobby with director Rachel Talalay. Hello, Rachel.
Hi.
You have been doing panels and a commentary soon. You also did a really nice thing and participated in the meetup with the Whovian Feminism group yesterday. Tell me a little bit about that.
I've really respect the Whovian Feminism blog, and so I had been in touch with Alyssa, who writes for it, because it's really an intelligent blog. And I'd been in touch with her saying, I'm upset that some of the commentary is so negative, both toward feminism, but also there had been a real hate-on toward Stephen Moffat. And so I had emailed her, and the first thing she did was say, and I emailed saying, I am the real Rachel Talalay. And she then came back through my Twitter account and said, I had an email from somebody who says they're you, or is it you? So I had to go back and go, yes. And said, I want to sort of address, it makes me uncomfortable to read this Moffat, this incredible Moffat hate that was just get over it. He sucks and he's terrible and it's all terrible and, just get rid of him. And so we ended up in a dialogue, which has led to my doing an interview with for Whovian Feminism and talking a bit about my respect for Moffat and the difference between what you see on screen and what it is like to work with him, which then when this happened, she said, I'm going to do a fan meetup. And I'm fascinated by what the fans think on this topic, and I'm fascinated about what I do wrong and obviously what I do right.
How do you think your message has sort of come through then? Do you think you've convinced others that Moffat is actually not that bad at all?
I think that what I've opened the door to is something that people don't really know, which is how amazing it is to work with him. And that is a different question from what is his text. But so if you can only judge him on his text, then you have a right to judge and say, I disagree with this. But I was able to open the door to some people to say the working relationship was so incredibly respectful. And that meant more to me, obviously, than not that I think there's things wrong in the text, but it's really important to say there's a person there. In the same way that we do read our reviews and have to pretend that we have Teflon skin, but sometimes go, how do you say it? I didn't mean that, or damn, they caught that.
With some of the negative press that has been going around with lack of women writers, directors, and so on, with yourself, Sheree Folkson, and of course Catherine Trujena being announced for the 9th series, is it cynical to say that the hiring of women directors or rehiring of women directors, is it cynical to say that that's a reactionary thing, or is it just they're hiring the right person for the right job?
I don't know that it's cynical. I think there's some reality to it. I think it's unfortunate that it has to be the fandom complaining and that there isn't. But people also say it should just be the right person for the job. But, there's a million people out there. And it's complex to find the right person for the job. And how do you know? And so I was a little bit upset when Moffat said, well, I can't get women. So I'm like, oh, so that makes me, Swiss cheese, okay. And I thought that was a little bit of a dismiss, that was not my favorite comment of his. But I think that you can only look forward and say it's good that the fandom has been made people more aware and helped open the door and open the thought process to more women. But you don't want to just say, oh, it has to all be women now, because, it does have to be the right people and the right balance.
So when I last talked to you, the shows hadn't aired, and I said, what did you use from your horror experience and, the long film experience you had and apply to these? And, well, now you can tell me. So it's all about what I learned, in particular on Nightmare on Elm Street. And I gave an example in the last talk about how we took from Nightmare 1, Ronnie Blakely being yanked through the window, we took directly that effect, which was a fast and cheap effect of using a rubber doll. And Moffat had written, or for Colonel Ahmed going through the airplane window, Moffat had written maybe just his feet, thinking we wouldn't be able to do it. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to do that. I know how to do this. But every single day, every detail that I had learned about how to coordinate mechanical effects, visual effects, and makeup effects
and how long they take, so that you're not poorly estimating how long each thing is going to be, and you're doing other things while things are getting ready. Every piece of that history in my brain, it was part of what I used for on Doctor Who.
Yes, go ahead.
On a completely different tack, you said in your talk that you and Michelle Gomez had this sort of telepathic link, but I was just thinking, this is the finale, you've got all these pressures. On top of that, it's a new master who's a woman, and she is gloriously over the top, and that could have gone sideways, and she's a great actress, and of course it didn't, but what's your part in that, making sure it doesn't go completely over the top, because it comes this close and doesn't, you know?
I know, and it's a fine line, and a little bit of that's in editing, but a lot of it was in the read-through, which was phenomenal, and I wish that I had a copy of the read-through because everybody was amazing. But she was just playing. She just came in the room and played, and there were times when she went way over the top, and so that she had really smartly done that. So we had the dialogue about the whole episode to discuss. Oh, that was over the top. And at one point I wrote a note, and I saw her noting that I wrote a note because she went way over the top. But also I was allowed to let her play a lot, and then in editing we were able to say, okay, that's... And you never know. I mean, you know, some people think, I have read people say she's ridiculous, and I've read people say only one or two criticisms. And one of the criticisms I read blamed me because, you know, that terrible director Rachel Talalay let her go over the top, or, you know, which I just I kind of loved that it was my fault, which of course it was, but given that almost everything I read embraced her, and a lot of what I read more of was I didn't want a female master, and I was completely suspicious, and boy, do I love her. And then I give a lot of credit to her because, you know, you can't direct somebody to be that brilliant. It doesn't matter how good you are. They got to, you know, they bring it, and you just go, wow.
You had just talked about the differences between British TV, North American TV, as far as production schedules, timings, roles, and things like that. So thinking of over-the-top performances, notes, editing, do you have much flexibility for retakes, for rejiggering scripts or whatever during Doctor Who production?
By retakes, do you mean reshoots, or just going more than once?
Yeah, multiple takes, for example.
So every day, all you do in television is monitor. If I do one more take, how's that going to affect later in the day? You know, so all you're doing is you're calculating all the time. If I do this one more time, will I not get this shot? And that's all you do all day long. But there's also a huge expectation. Peter needs to go a bunch of times just because he needs to play with it. So every time you go, it's interesting and different. And so you just would love to do everything. You'd love to go and go and go with Peter. And you're just saying, can I go again? You know, do I have time to go again? Do I have time to go again? So yes, there is some room because there has to be. On the other hand, you're always going, oh my God, there's not enough time. But there's a little bit more time for performance in Doctor Who because the writing is so, you can't just go, oh, the effects are really cool, so no one will pay attention to the storyline. You know, which is what happens in an action show often when you're so jammed against the wall, that's good enough. And I was always afraid when I thought, oh, that's good enough, but I think I think Moffat meant this, that I would get in the editing room and he would go, you know, and that happened, you know, sometimes. He would go, don't you have a better take on that? I knew I should do it again.
There are some intense scenes with Jenna Coleman early on in the episode in the lava scene there. Like, how did you sort of drive that performance out of Jenna? Was it a lot of takes? Was it a little rehearse and record sort of thing? Or did it just come from the writing and the performance?
The worst part about that was that they did something that I said don't do, which is that we shot half the scene at the end of one day. We shot Peter's half of the scene at the end of one day, and then we went home, and then in the morning we picked up with Jenna's half of the scene. And Jenna is so raw and she's trying not to give everything away in Peter's side of the scene, and so when she came back in the morning to do it, and she was brilliant, but she feels like there was something the day before that was better and that she never replicated, so she was angry all the time, that not angry, but upset all the time that she wasn't living up to something. And this is a big actor thing. Am I as good as I possibly, a good actor thing? Is this as good as it can possibly be? And we had a lot of dialogue on both days about how to texture the lies. Who knows what, And if Peter knows that he's playing her and he's manipulating, should he give this away or shouldn't he? Whereas in the cafe scene, it was much more straightforward because they don't know that they're lying to each other. So we as the audience know. But in this case, Peter knows everything, or the doctor knows everything. So how do you balance that? So there's a lot of conversation. What's interesting with Jenna is that, and Peter's like, well, maybe I should play it more angry, or, because deep down I am angry with her. And then you're like, well, but then then her response is different. But with Jenna, she very easily goes to a very emotional place. So it's pulling her back that's hard. I just find I find them both so ridiculously compelling to watch that you're just sitting there going. And you have to add to it that it's hot. There are explosions going on. I mean, it's a really difficult set. There's things blowing up. There's fire everywhere. So it's a very, very hot set. And they're doing this intense scene, and they're amazing.
I know. This isn't so much a question as a comment and a compliment. There's a couple camera moves in Dark Water, specifically. I think it's a reveal of the fact that there's a Cyberman sitting behind Jenna Coleman, and the camera sort of pans up to this Cyberman, then sort of, rack focuses there, swings around, and then there's this massive, huge swoop as Clara sort of kicks back the chair and then turns around and notices of it. How did you structure that shot? Because it's one of my favorite, I think, in all of Doctor Who.
I'm glad to say that wasn't in the script, and that was completely me.
Yeah.
And I'll do this in the commentary, but the interesting thing about it is that Jen is in a swivel chair, and we have to come around with the camera at the speed, and we can't come around as she wants to swivel around really fast, and we can't get around that fast. And she's saying, but I know, and I need to turn fast, and you're like fighting this moment of, making it feel. I'm trying to tell an actor to do something that's not quite natural, but is working to the camera. So we stay longer. As we come around her, we stay long watching her. So we've seen it, then, it's like that plays the tension. But the actor's saying, but that doesn't feel right, and you're trying to say, but through the camera, it's going to, with the music, it's going to be amazing. And that took a bunch of takes to get the timing right, but I can't really tell you how I came up with that shot. It just, you're on the set. It gave the ability to do 360, and it just felt like the right thing to build that all in one shot rather than in a bunch of cuts.
Yeah. You said you don't storyboard, but is that and like the later shot or the earlier shot in the street, where we sort of do a similar sort of pan around, and we discover that it's actually weeks later when Clara's looking at where the accident scene where Danny was. Is that something that sort of happens like spontaneously on the set, or is that something you sort of planned and worked out beforehand?
That was scripted. That transition was scripted. How we were doing it, I just described when we were at the location. In early location scouts, I described what we were going to do. And then I added an additional 180 into it. So, no, I didn't storyboard that. Really, effects is what I ended up storyboarding. We happened to have on that day an incredible crane operator. And, you're as good as your tools on some level. So the fact that he really understood, it's the same with dolly grips. It's then it's not going from point A to pushing the camera from point A to point B. It's understanding, listening to the words and understanding as well why we need to be here at this moment. And we had a crane operator who was able to do that. And boy, that, wow, that just makes a huge difference. Which is why if you, on a, huge show with the most experienced people on the planet, if you're doing Avengers, and you're working with these people who just are the best people on the planet, then it's wonderful because you don't have to have that vocabulary, But here you're working, we didn't know which crane operator we were going to get that day because they don't work in Cardiff. We have to get somebody out of London and you just don't know what you're going to get. And we lucked out to that person who was able to give me more rather than my having to mechanically say, on this line, hit this beat. He knew it.
I think the overall reaction from viewers and reviewers alike, I think, was one of praise. Did you hear a lot of good feedback once the episodes actually aired?
Yes, completely, overwhelmingly good. I mean, of course, there's the negatives, but overwhelmingly amazing. And interestingly, before the episode aired, I had an email from the producer Brian Minchin saying, "Turn off all your social media." Right. And everything, and just don't talk to anybody. And I was like, my first response was like, oh shit, I said something I wasn't supposed to. Oh no, what did I do? And then and then he said, because if it goes wrong, nobody deserves to deal with the social media, what happens on social media when it's wrong. So I did. I turned off, and I was shooting another show, and it's a Saturday when the British, and I went and did my laundry. Right. And in this hotel, knowing full well. And within 10 minutes, I mean, I didn't look for like 40 minutes, but within 10 minutes of the show starting, he had emailed and said, go ahead and turn it back on. And then a reporter from Den of Geek emailed me and said, you broke the internet, because there was so much excitement by Dark Water. So it was scary again, because, the response to Death in Heaven wasn't as universally happy as it was to Dark Water. But they were still amazing. But it was harder to do as much as we did in Dark Water and, keep that up.
A standard question, but needs to be asked. Would you say yes to coming back for a further directorial spin in Doctor Who?
Would I say yes? Hypothetically, yes, I would say yes. Right. Hypothetically, yes.
We'll leave it ambiguously at that. Rachel Talalay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to these, and we hope you enjoy the first part of our Miniscope on director Rachel Talalay, covering Dark Water and Death in Heaven on the next episode of Radio Free Skaro.